Once again, from the studios of UNO Television on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, consider this, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
Representing the 2nd Congressional District for 16 years has been a blessing, and I'm truly honored to have been picked 8 times by the people of the 2nd District to represent them. It's an honor that I take to heart and will stay with me for the rest of my life, and I'm very thankful for that opportunity.
With wife Robin by his side, Representative Lee Terry concedes the race for Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, the 2014 midterm elections. Joining us to talk more about them is Joe Jordan. Joe is the managing editor and investigative reporter for the Nebraska Watchdog. Joe, thank you very much for being here and welcome.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I think on the minds of so many, especially now, is what happened to Lee Terry?
Well, I think in the end, this campaign actually began and ended in October of 2013 when he made the comment that he was going to take his paycheck during the government shutdown and said he needed to take it because he had a nice house and a kid in college. That was, for the Democrats, political gold. It gave them the opportunity, and they used it for the last 14 months. They beat him over the head with that comment. There wasn't a commercial that they ran in the last month that didn't have that item somewhere mentioned in it. And in the end, that I think really did him in. There were factors along the way, but that was the thing that convinced Democrats over a year ago that Lee Terry was finally really vulnerable in their minds.
Wow. I want to talk about those campaign ads for a few minutes here. First of all, you mentioned them. That's part of the demise here. Overall, though, what is your opinion about campaign ads? Kind of a loaded question, but...
Well, campaign commercials have become the political stump speech of today. Years ago when candidates used to go town to town and stand on a stump and give their speeches, that's what they did. Now it's in television, especially radio commercials a bit, but basically it's a television commercial that gets these candidates known in their state and in their congressional districts, as it were, and presidential races. The television commercial cannot be, in my view, you cannot overstate the importance of it.
Yeah, but Joe, really, how much does it get the candidate known when we're busy really focusing on the opponent and the negative things going on with him or her?
Well, there's no doubt that the majority of television ads you see are negative. Let me give you an example. When Congressman Terry had basically easy campaigns, you very seldom even saw commercials coming from him. They might say something nice about him, but it was in the tough campaigns, the one we just went through, the campaign in 2012 and 2008. In those campaigns, there were negative ads because the other side is competing with you. It's a barroom brawl, and you better bring what you've got to the table, and that's why the negative ads are out there. There's also ultimately the question of, do these ads work? Now, the old saw is, well, if it didn't work, nobody would use them. I've actually, over the years, come to believe that that's absolutely true. And part of it is this. As you go through your daily life and things are going good for you, everything's fine, but boy, you see that car accident on the way home, and the first thing you say, boy, you should have seen the wreck on the interstate today. You forget about all the good things that happened to you during the day. It's that little bit of negativity that stands out that people remember. That's what those ads draw on. They try to point to people to remember something bad about the opponent.
What's interesting, though, is that when you talk with folks, they'll say, I'm just so tired of all the
Yes.
negativeness that's going on with the campaign ads, and I do find that very ironic.
Well, I think they are. I think they don't like them, but you still can't take away the impact of them. Let's be honest. In this last race, there was a moment that happened that I thought everybody in town was talking about. Convicted murderer Nico Jenkins in a courtroom says, vote for Lee Terry. Everybody in town within 24 hours, I think, knew about that instance. Why did he say it? He'd seen the commercials. I know he did. He had to. And everybody in town knew exactly what he was referring to, the fact that his face and Brad Ashford's face were put on a TV screen side by side. Nico Jenkins knew that, and everybody in town knew it.
Joe, I think it's a good time to ask then, who produces those commercials, and maybe a follow-up, how much control does the candidate really have over the content?
Well, usually in any big races, usually the really nasty, considered negative ads are done by an outside, quote-unquote, third-party group. For instance, in the Terry Ashford race, the Nico Jenkins was done by the National Republican Congressional Campaign Committee. They put that ad together. Congressman Terry has maintained that he didn't know anything about it, says he didn't like it. He never publicly asked them to take it down, which he would have had the opportunity to do that. He didn't do that. But that's who put the nastiest ads you're ever going to see are going to be done by somebody else, not the candidate themselves.
Okay, I want to switch gears and go over to our neighbors in Iowa to a very interesting 30-second political ad that actually gained this candidate national attention. So we'll go ahead and roll that, and then let's talk about it when it's done.
Sure.
I'm Joni Ernst. I grew up castrating hogs on an Iowa farm. So when I get to Washington, I'll know how to cut pork.
Joni Ernst, mother, soldier, conservative.
My parents taught us to live within our means. It's time to force Washington to do the same. To cut wasteful spending, repeal Obamacare, and balance the budget. I'm Joni Ernst, and I approve this message because Washington's full of big spenders. Let's make them squeal.
All right, so tell us about this woman and the strategy behind that ad.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, if you'll notice in that ad, she never mentions her opponent. Doesn't talk about Mr. Braley at all. It's talking about Washington, because in her campaign, he's from Washington, and he was a sitting congressman. She's the outsider trying to get in, so she's running a little bit against Washington, a lot against Democratic policies, the reference to Obamacare, the cut spending, and in the end, that commercial, you can't do that commercial in all the states, but boy, in the state of Iowa, when you're talking about hogs and pork, you can run that commercial. And I think there is no doubt that commercial elevated her early in the campaign to a situation where it helped get her through the primary, it drove her right into the general election. Whether you like it or not, in terms of effect, that may have been the most effective commercial of the 2014 campaign across the country.
Wow, what I find ironic in that is that she's talking about spending, and then we take a look at the numbers in terms of what people are spending for those campaigns. Yeah. And it seems anymore that either you need to be rich or famous or a little bit of both. Talk to us a little bit about the money that went into the 2014 midterm elections.
Well, the last estimate I saw nationally was $4 billion across the country, and most of that goes to those television commercials. The funny thing about the money in politics is when candidates are beginning to run, especially for an office such as U.S. Senate, governor, House race here in Nebraska, or any of the House races across the country, when they are getting into that mode of trying to figure out if they're going to run or not, there's usually at some point they're talking with a political consultant or a party leader in their state. And one of the first things they're going to hear is, can you pay for this yourself? That's what they want to know, because if the person says they can, that's gravy. If they say they can't, then the party leader, that political consultant, is going to tell them, well, where are you going to get the money? Because you've got to go out and then you've got to raise it. And that becomes a real chore, because raising money, you're basically making phone calls and asking people to give money. It's probably the basest part of the campaign that every candidate will tell you they don't really like.
Wow, is that going to be, Joe, in your opinion, a trend then? I mean, is that just the way that it's going to be? You're going to have to figure out the dollars to make sure that you're going to be...
Yes, and the concern, especially coming out of the Citizens United opinion by the Supreme Court a couple years ago now, the big concern is that corporations can give what they want, that the quote-unquote little guy, the $50 contribution doesn't mean anything anymore. What's curious is you'll hear lots of candidates as they go through these campaigns, and they'll say that they got the $5 and $10 contribution, and that's a vote. And that's true. Usually if somebody gives you $5 or $10, they're probably going to vote for you. But these campaigns anymore are funded by large organizations that are giving, hundreds of thousands of dollars. In a state campaign in Nebraska, any individual corporation can give as much as they want to anyone. There's no limits as there are in the federal level for the federal offices. So there's lots of money out there, $4 billion this year. So
So in an ideal world, let's go to that just for a moment. What do you picture in terms of fair campaigning? What would that look like?
Well, I guess the argument in favor of things like some type of national political referendum where you would have campaigns funded by taxpayers, checking off the box on your income tax returns and giving $2 or $3 and having this amount of money set aside for elections, and then candidates come in and they take money out and everybody has a limit. But the Supreme Court has ruled that political speech is unlimited, and you can spend what you want and do whatever you want with it, and that's where the campaign commercials come in, and I don't see that changing in the near future. I mean, it would take a major shift from the Supreme Court in this country to change that landscape, and I think that's where we are right now. And both sides, Democrats and Republicans, they're out there, slashing away to get big dollars for these campaigns.
Well, great segue. Let's show where we are right now. So let's go back to the races. We're going to put up a graphic right now, the congressional race. Anything more that you want to tell us in terms of this particular race that we haven't mentioned already?
Well, I think the key to this race was, as I said at the beginning, the Democrats felt early on that they could get Terry out because of the comment that he made about the nice house and the kid in college, and they thought that was a politician looking, in their view, somewhat selfish, and I think they seized on that. The other thing is, there's a person at the bottom of that screen, Stephen Laird, the Libertarian candidate. You can argue about his 5% of his vote, but my gut has always told me that he was going to be a key factor in this race, because that 5% that Stephen Laird got, most likely those are people that philosophically are aligned with Congressman Terry. If you put his 5% into the Terry kitty, Terry's got 51% of the vote. Now you're going to argue that, well, he wouldn't get them all, and maybe not, but I'm pretty sure Mr. Laird's votes would have gone far more to Terry than to Ashford. And what a lot of those votes represented, because Libertarians usually only get 1 or 2% in Nebraska, that other 3% that he picked up were probably Republicans that were tired and upset with Congressman Terry, because over the past couple of years, he's made his really base conservative vote unhappy with him. Votes that he's taken, some are 6 or 7 years old now, on the bailout back in 2008. A lot of Republicans thought he shouldn't have voted for that bank bailout that cost billions and billions of dollars. They're still unhappy about it. They saw an opportunity. It started 2 years ago. Two years ago, when Terry ran then against John Ewing, in that race, in the 2nd Congressional District, Mitt Romney, Republican running for president, Mitt Romney got 7,000 more votes than Lee Terry in the 2nd District. Those are 7,000 votes that you think would automatically go to Lee Terry. They didn't. They made the Ewing-Terry race very close. This time, there were probably several thousand votes again that didn't go to Lee Terry. Some of those went to Stephen Laird, the Libertarian. And as I said, if you take Laird off the ballot, Congressman Terry might have gotten reelected.
Interesting. All right, let's move on to the governor's race now.
Sure.
And talk to us a little bit about your thoughts there.
Well, I've always thought that the key to this race was whoever won the Republican primary. And Pete Ricketts, escaped with about a 1% win over John Bruning in that race. And the reason that is it's really tough. If you go back over the years, when there's an open seat in the governor's office in this state, more often than not, a Republican will win it. The Democrats have been successful basically twice. Ben Nelson in 1990, running against Kay Orr. Bob Kerrey, all the way back in 1982, running against Charlie Thone. Those were incumbent Republican governors that the Democratic challenger beat. Usually, open seats are competitive. But in this state, those were 2 Republican governors, Charlie Thone and Kay Orr. They made a mistake during their times in office. They basically raised taxes. Raising taxes in this state is pretty much a mortal political sin. And when you do that, you better have a really good answer for why you did it, or you're going to be in trouble. And that happened to both Charlie Thone and to Kay Orr in their campaigns, and that's why they got beat. This case, the seat was open. Mr. Ricketts basically appealing to a red state where you've got 200,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats. You take that message statewide, really hard for Democrats to break through, unless you've got something you can really pin on your Republican opponent. And Mr. Hasselbrook, the Democrat, never really had that item where he could say, if you elect Ricketts, here's the problem. It wasn't there because he had no history of saying he did this and he did that in office. So it was always going to be an uphill slug for Mr. Hasselbrook, and it wound up that way.
Okay, thank you. And let's go on now to the Senate
Sure.
race and tell us your thoughts there.
Well, this is sort of the governor's office, the governor's race on steroids, because Ben Sasse, I mean, there's a 34-point win there, and I was relatively early on in this race convinced that Sasse was going to do it. Again, similar situation, comes out of a competitive Republican primary that he went into with about a 3% name recognition. And boy, you talk about a candidate that made very few mistakes between a primary and a general election. Ben Sasse is probably one of those candidates, because he got his way through the Republican primary. It was tough. There were 2 or 3 other really good candidates in that race. He survived that. And when you survive a Republican primary in the state, that usually bodes well for you. He goes up against Dave Domina, good, solid Democratic candidate. The only problem is the same problem that Hasselbrook had in the governor's race. You've got 200,000 people that are already registered Republican that are probably aligned with you. Unless you figure out a way to really tick them off or give them another reason to go away from you, you're probably in pretty good shape. And in the Sasse campaign, criticized by Mr. Domina, and we did stories about it at Nebraska Watchdog, where Mr. Sasse was reluctant to talk about certain issues and ignored, for instance, the League of Women Voters voter guide. Didn't even put his name into it. And Domina complained that Sasse was trying to deduct the voters. That argument worked, I think, a little bit, but again, in a highly Republican-charged state, it was uphill, and you lose by 34% of the votes in a case like that.
Thank you. And our thanks to the Omaha News for that graphical information. I want to move on now. 4 states gave themselves a raise in this election, Nebraska being one of those. Let's take a look at the map and talk us through maybe the rationale behind that.
Well, where the minimum wage has been on statewide ballots, it's done very well. And I was, it's same happened on Tuesday. I mean, it passed overwhelmingly here in Nebraska, 60-40. You go back to the petition drive that took place in the spring to get it on the ballot. 135,000 people across the state signed that petition. A lot of those names were thrown out because the people weren't registered voters and what have you, or some didn't even live in Nebraska. They were across in Iowa and maybe down in Kansas and Iowa and didn't realize they couldn't sign it and did. Even throwing all those names out, the supporters of raising the minimum wage had thousands more names than they needed to get it on the ballot. Once it was on the ballot, this was the interesting part to me. I always expected there was going to be some pushback, that whether it was the chambers of commerce who opposed raising the minimum wage, or other real quote-unquote pro-business groups that oppose raising the minimum wage. Philosophically, they think it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. They never competed. They didn't run commercials saying don't go along with the minimum wage increase. I thought that was definitely going to come. It never did. And the reason I'm pretty sure it didn't come is I think at some point the opponents of raising the minimum wage got together and said, you know what, we're not going to win this fight. We had thousands of people sign petitions. They've already put their name on the dotted line. They want to raise this thing. So let's just leave it alone, let it go into effect, and we'll raise the minimum wage. Because if we fight them on it, all these other candidates, maybe in the Senate race, maybe in the governor's race, if they closed up a little bit, we're going to bring all these other people to the polls. All we're doing is making people mad at us by saying, you're not going to get a raise, you're not going to get a raise. So as opposed to inflaming that part of the electorate, I think they decided, hands off, we'll take our lumps at the polls, let the minimum wage go up, but we don't want it to get into these other races. One race it clearly got into was the Lee Terry-Brad Ashford race. Terry was opposed to raising the minimum wage. Ashford pushed across this district to increase the minimum wage. And in the Omaha vote, you'll see over time how the Democrats were able to get people who might not normally show up in an off-year, non-presidential election. They got into the polls. A lot of those people were walking in there first and foremost to vote for the minimum wage, and while they were there, they checked the Ashford box as well.
Okay, thank you. And when we're thinking in terms of results, folks are already starting to talk about some of the issues that were maybe tabled a bit while the campaigning was going on. But the pipeline is obviously on the minds of so many. How do the results, the outcome, how is that going to play into the pipeline issue?
Well, now you will probably see, because the Republicans are going to control the U.S. Senate, you will probably see a piece of legislation passed by the Senate, passed by the Republican-controlled House, going to the White House saying, let's get the pipeline going. Then the president can decide what he's going to do. Is he going to veto it and send it back, or will he sign it and it will go into law? If he vetoes it and sends it back, then you're going to have an interesting situation in the U.S. Senate where they're going to have to really struggle to get enough votes to override that veto. At the moment, I would say they probably don't have those votes, but the pipeline's an interesting issue, and you'll get some Democrats to cross over and say that they can go with it. They want the construction of it. So hard for me to believe there'll be enough votes to override a presidential veto, but the pipeline's an odd issue where you've got strange alliances. You've got labor, a pro-democratic group, saying, no, we want the pipeline. Then you've got the environmentalists on the other side saying, we don't want the pipeline. They're both Democratic constituents, and they've split, across the board on it. You've got, in Nebraska, you've got landowners out west, conservative Republicans, who don't want the pipeline because they think it's people infringing on landowner rights where they're putting the pipeline. Mm-hmm. So it's a strange coalition of groups in that pipeline discussion. But again, if it gets to the White House, the first step is, what does the president do? Because I think there is going to be a bill that lands on his desk. What does he do? And if he vetoes it, are there enough votes on Capitol Hill to override?
Interesting. All right, next question.
Sure.
Obamacare.
Obamacare was curious in this state on a couple of points. First of all, it was Ben Sass's number one issue. It was the issue that got him probably initial recognition, not just in the state, but nationally, and probably brought a lot of outstate national sort of dollars into his campaign. He campaigned as the guy who read every line of Obamacare, carried this big, huge pile of Obamacare, the bill and the law across the state, took it to town halls and said, if I get elected, this is going, I'm going to get rid of it. It resonated in several parts of the state. What was interesting to me was, in the 2nd congressional district race, Terry and Ashford, it never really came up. You hardly heard anything about Obamacare. And my guess is because in the 2nd congressional district, it's probably a swing issue. Given the demographics of this district, you probably have a lot of people, and I'm sure the polling would show it, it's probably 50-50-ish on Obamacare, because if it was 70-30 or 60-40, I've got to believe Congressman Terry would have tried to hit Ashford with that issue a bit harder. Now, Ashford's point was he didn't want to throw it out, he just wants to get it fixed, but Terry has voted dozens of times on Capitol Hill to eliminate Obamacare completely, and then along the line make some fixes as well. But I think if this district was wavering on Obamacare, which I think they are, that's why you didn't see any ads on it. You didn't really hear much about it in the 2nd congressional district. Statewide, get outside of Omaha and Lincoln, and the politicians pushed it real hard. I hate Obamacare, vote for me, and it won't go.
Yeah, it's pretty complicated to explain, other than just voicing your opinion, like I like it or I don't like it. Well, but it's overwhelming to the rest of the people to try to get their arms around it. And I think maybe in some ways it was just almost avoided because it was so complex and overwhelming.
I'll be honest with you. I don't know anybody that can tell you I really understand what all the tenets of Obamacare are and how they play out. I think everybody knows the pre-existing conditions. If you've got a child or with a pre-existing condition, that's going to be covered. And as the Republicans try to fix this thing, if they can, if they throw it out and try to fix it, they've pretty much said pre-existing conditions will be part of any new legislation, because I think the country understands that pre-existing conditions, they're clearly they want that covered. There's other parts of it that they don't want covered, but I don't think there's anybody out there that can really say they understand this thing, every nook and cranny of Obamacare, because it is so complicated. It's about health insurance, which most people, their eyes begin to glaze over as it is, wondering, what's covered, what's in it for me, what's in it for my kids, how am I going to pay for all these things? Healthcare is complicated. That's why it costs, 30% of the GDP goes to health insurance and things like that. It's a complicated mess.
Okay. Presidential race just 2 years away here now. Talk to us about the political landscape, another loaded question, in Washington between now and then.
Well, in effect, if there's anything that's going to be done on Capitol Hill, and I'm not sure that there is, but if there is anything that's going to be done on Capitol Hill, it's probably going to happen in the next 6 months, because it's already started, but really hardcore starting in July 2015, candidates, especially on the Republican side, are going to begin jockeying for a position. You will see, I would be stunned if there are not candidates at the 2015 state fair over in Iowa, campaigning, because 2016, the Iowa caucuses are here, early 2016. It's not far away. Hard for people to maybe want to to stomach that because they just got done with a bloodbath here in 2014 in some respects, but 2016 is right around the corner. So it makes it difficult to get policies passed through DC because the two sides lock up. They don't want to give an inch to anything. They don't want to look weak to their potential constituents in these states. But Iowa is going to be, ripe with candidates. And on the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton is obviously considered the favorite going in. Curious to see if anybody else is going to try to nudge her off that perch that she's on right now and see if they can grab the nomination away from her. Right now, it's a tall task for any Democrat, but I remember 4 years ago, 6 years ago, people thought that she was it and not Mr. Obama, and look what happened there.
In just the 2 minutes we have remaining, lessons learned. Just coming out of the midterm, now we're setting our sights, 2 years here in the future. What did we learn from all of this?
Well, I think maybe we didn't learn it, but it was just sort of nailed down in our consciousness that the money plays a huge role in the political world right now. You're not going to be a candidate that survives if you don't have enough financial resources. I mean, part of the reason, and a significant part of the reason that Brad Ashford won was because he didn't outraise Lee Terry, but he had enough money coming in from outside of Nebraska, from the Democratic Party in D.C., putting the estimates right now are maybe $2 million in the end, that they pumped into this district on his behalf. Without that, no chance. Lots of Congressman Terry's previous opponents, didn't get that money. And partly because they weren't contesting, it wasn't a contested race. Once the outside money from DC sees that they've got a chance, then they start pouring it in. And right now, Nebraska's 2nd congressional district is one of a dozen or so in the state that are, or in the country rather, that are contested. Most of the districts are gerrymandered by Democrats and by Republicans, so that they don't really have any competition in their general election. Republicans, for the most part, anymore fear a challenge in their primary from the further right of their own party more than they do fear any general election campaign.
Oh, Joe Jordan here with Nebraska Watchdog. I want to put up your website so that if people want to learn more about that, or you, or both, they can go ahead and log on to nebraskawatchdog.org. The phone number 402-215-3000. Joe Jordan, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure, trust me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or email us at considerthis@tvmail.unomaha.edu.